As for you, you meant it for evil unto me, and God meant it for good. So, Genesis 50:20, it's just 13 Hebrew words that, well, they've kind of comforted millions of people in their suffering and confounded theologians for millennia. Because embedded in Joseph's declaration to his brothers is a philosophical puzzle that has divided Christianity into competing camps for 2,000 years. How can God mean something for good while human beings simultaneously mean it for evil? If God orchestrates events towards his purposes, are the brothers truly responsible for their wickedness? And if human beings have genuine free will to choose evil, how can God promise that their choices will ultimately serve his good purposes? And here's the pastoral weight of this question. If you have experienced betrayal, abuse, and injustice, or profound loss, if you've cried out, "Where was God?" then Genesis 50:20 either offers profound hope or it raises some disturbing questions about divine complicity in evil. So which is it? Well, welcome back to Come Listen With Me. I'm Ricky Black, aka Elder Eleazar, and today we're taking a deep dive into one of Scripture's most theologically loaded verses. We're going to explore providence, free will, human wickedness, and what it means to trust that God can bring from evil without being the author of evil. And it's going to be intellectually challenging. It's going to be pastorally sensitive, and I think it's going to give you language for tension that you have felt but maybe could not quite articulate. All right, so let's begin. So let me be direct about what we're going to wrestle with today. So Genesis 50 verse 20. It's not a cute inspirational quote you put on a coffee mug. It's a good idea, but it's not really what it's for. It is a dense theological statement that raises massive questions about the nature of God, the reality of evil, and the mechanisms of divine providence. So when Joseph says, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good," he's making a claim that needs an explanation. How can the same event carry two contradictory intentions at the same time? One evil and one good. Well, depending on how you answer that question, you land on different theological camps that have been arguing for centuries about this. And here's what I'm not going to do in the video. I'm not going to present that there is only one acceptable Christian answer to these questions. Different traditions, whether Reformed, Arminian, Molinist, Open Theist, and yes, Latter-day Saint, have developed sophisticated frameworks for understanding providence and freedom. Each has its strengths, and each addresses real concerns. And each reads Genesis 50:20 just a little bit differently. What I am going to do is walk you through 5 major theological perspectives. And we're going to explain how each one interprets Joseph's declaration and also explore the philosophical and pastoral implications. And then we're going to bring it back to what this means for you when you're in your own sort of season of wondering what evils are being presented against you and wondering whether God is working or whether evil has won. We're going to explore 5 major questions. How does the Hebrew grammar of Genesis 5:20, what does it actually tell us about divine intention? How do different Christian traditions understand the relationship between God's sovereignty and human freedom? Does God's redemptive use of evil make him complicit in it, or is there a way to hold God's goodness and his providence together? What role does time play in understanding when God meant it for good from eternity past or in response to human choices? And how do we actually live in the light of this verse without minimizing evil, passively accepting suffering, or losing trust in God's goodness? This is theology with pastoral stakes. So let's dive right in. So before we can interpret the theology of Genesis 5:20, we need to understand what the text actually says in the Hebrew. If you want a concordance, I'll go ahead and link one. That's a really great one that's online. Or you can always just, pick something up. I like the JPS sort of translation of the talk. It's a fantastic one. It's great for these references. But if not, if you don't want a book, a free link is going to be in the description. So anyway, the English translation, God meant it for good, smooths over some important nuances here, as you'd expect when you're coming from very different culturally different languages. See, the verse is structured with a clear parallel. You meant evil against me, but God, well, he's the one who meant it for good. Now, the Hebrew verb translated meant is chashav, right? And it can mean to think, to plan, to devise, to intend, to reckon. It's the same verb used when God reckoned Adam's faith as righteousness in Genesis 15, verse 6. And the word carries a sense of a deliberate thought and a purposeful intention. And here's why that's critical. The same verb is used for both the brothers and for God. The brothers intended evil, God intended good. And it's an important parallel. It's done on purpose, right? It suggests that both agents, the brother and God, had genuine intentionality regarding the same event. The brothers intended Joseph's suffering and removal. God intended Joseph's elevation and the preservation of life. And it's not simple God reacting after the fact. The verse presents God as having his own purpose that's running alongside and ultimately overriding the brother's evil purpose, right? And that's an important contrast. The Hebrew word for evil is ra, right? It means moral wickedness, harm, calamity. So the brothers' intentions were unambiguously malicious, no doubt about it. They wanted Joseph gone. And the word for good is tova. The same moral universe as when God calls creation good. And it points towards moral goodness, beneficial outcomes, and alignment with God's creative purpose. It means that it's functioning correctly as intended. So the same events are being viewed through two radically different intentions, one evil, one good. And the verse ends with a purpose clause. It says, in order to keep alive a numerous people. It's kind of important, right? God is meaning it for good. It's not abstract. And it's tied to a concrete outcome, not some nebulous objective. The preservation of life during famine. And that language echoes the Abrahamic covenant. Joseph's suffering becomes one of the means by which God preserves the covenant line and blesses others through it. So Genesis 50:20, it's not a vague statement that everything happens for a reason. It's Joseph's case that the purpose is specific. Life is preserved. God's covenant purposes is moving forward, right? So what does the grammar establish? First, both human beings and God are described with the same verb of intentionality. Second, the brothers' intentions are genuinely evil. Third, God's intentions are genuinely good. And fourth, the same event can carry multiple intentions at the same time. Fifth, God's purposes here is concrete and life-giving, not vague or sentimental. With that foundation in place, we can now ask how divine providence and human freedom actually relate to each other. See, Christian theology has developed multiple frameworks for understanding how God's sovereignty relates to freedom. So let's walk through a few major perspectives, and I'll explain how each one reads Genesis 50:20, and I'll note the strengths and weaknesses of each. The first framework is the Calvinist or Reformed view, often called meticulous providence. This tradition, rooted in John Calvin and developed by thinkers like Jonathan Edwards and John Piper, it teaches that God, he sovereignly ordains every event that occurs down to the smallest detail. Now, from this perspective, Genesis 50:20 shows that God did not merely permit the brothers' evil, and he did not simply react to it. He ordained it as the means through which his good purposes would be accomplished. The brothers are still morally responsible because they acted according to their own evil desires. No one forced them, but God was simultaneously working through their freely chosen wickedness to accomplish his predetermined plan. So this view takes seriously God's absolute sovereignty. It can offer strong comfort in suffering. Nothing is random, nothing escapes God's control. But, honestly, critics argue that this can make God seem too close to evil. Like, it's as if he becomes, in some troubling sense, the ultimate source. And that raises real questions about whether human freedom is truly free if all choices are ultimately predetermined, if all the outcomes are already preordained. The second framework is the Arminian or Wesleyan view. And this one emphasizes free will and God's permissive will. On this view, human beings are they can genuinely choose otherwise. God does not cause the brothers' betrayal. They freely choose evil. But God, in his omniscience and wisdom, knows what they will do and is prepared to bring good from it. So God's meaning it for good is not a casual control. It's a redemptive response, right? This preserves genuine human responsibility, but it also helps protect God from being seen as the author of evil. But critics, they'll say it can make God seem less sovereign than the scripture suggests. And it does raise the question of how God can guarantee outcomes if he does not control the decisions that lead to them ultimately. Seems to bypass the whole, Calvinistic response there. Now, the third framework is Molinism. And this is named after the 16th century theologian Louis de Molina. Molinism proposes that God possesses what is called middle knowledge. And that means God knows not only what will happen, but what would happen if in any possible circumstance. So God knows how free beings would act if placed in particular situations. So God does not force the brothers to betray Joseph, but he knows that if these exact situations occur, they will freely choose evil. And by arranging, which circumstances occur, God can ensure that even free evil actions ultimately serve his redemptive purposes. Now, this view tries to preserve both that divine sovereignty and the genuine human freedom. It's elegant, and it's pretty sophisticated intellectually, but it's also philosophically complex, and many people find it difficult to grasp intuitively. It seems to be sort of a mishmash of the other philosophies we've already seen that still don't take into account like all the different iterations that can come out of it. And the fourth framework is open theism. Now, this perspective argues that the future is genuinely open. God knows all possibilities, but future free choices do not yet exist as fixed realities to be known, right? God does not exhaustively determine or necessarily foreknow every future free act. Instead, he responds dynamically to create choices in real time. Now, in this view, Genesis 50:20 shows God's astonishing ability to redeem what he did not cause. The brothers betray Joseph. God didn't script it, but God is so wise and so resourceful and so committed to the redemption that he can immediately begin working that evil toward good. And this view takes human freedom with the utmost seriousness and presents a God who is relationally engaged. But the critics are going to argue again that this too limits God too much and makes divine promises harder to ground securely. Now, that fifth framework, right? This is the Latter-day Saint perspective. LDS theology makes a distinctive contribution here through the doctrine of agency and foreordination. Agency is foundational. It's real. It is infallible. God does not force the soul without undermining the very purpose of mortality. And at the same time, LDS thought affirms foreordination, that some individuals were known and prepared for certain missions before mortality. So, Joseph in Egypt can be understood as one foreordained to a saving role. In that framework, the brothers exercised agency in betraying Joseph. Joseph exercised agency in remaining faithful and upright. God did not cause the brothers' wickedness, but he knew it would happen, and he positioned Joseph in ways that allowed that evil to be turned towards good. And so this allows God to remain sovereign without violating moral agency. The brothers are responsible. God remains purposeful, agency remains intact, and one of the strengths of this view is that it fits naturally with the Latter-day Saint perspective on agency, foreknowledge, and mortal testing. And when you compare these frameworks, each one, well, they do bring something valuable. Calvinism emphasizes God's sovereignty and the comfort of divine control. Arminianism emphasizes real human freedom and God's responsiveness to goodness. Molinism offers a sophisticated synthesis of the two. And open theism emphasizes dynamic divine engagement. And the LDS framework, well, it highlights inviolable agency within foreordained purposes. Now, what matters most here, though, is that Genesis 50:20 can't sustain this range of reflection because the verse itself holds the tension without mechanically resolving it. The text insists on both truths. Human beings meant evil, God meant good. And the exact mechanics remain, at least in part, mysterious. All right. So now we have to address the hardest question in this whole situation. If God meant the event for good, if he used it, worked through it, or even in some sense ordained it, does that make God complicit in evil? This is not just an abstract question, right? This is a cry that you hear from people who have suffered deeply. And if God could have stopped abuse, betrayal, or injustice, but he didn't, how is he not implicated? This is the war cry of the modern agnostic or atheist, right? It's the one 300-pound club that they want to swing around whenever they're talking about God. So traditional Christian theology has often drawn a distinction that we'll see between what God ordains and what God morally approves. In that framework, God can ordain that an event occur without morally proving the evil involved in it. So applied to Joseph, God may purpose to bring saving good through the brother's betrayal while still condemning the betrayal as evil. It's logically coherent, but pastorally, many find it hard to really grasp and to accept, because the question remains, why would a good God permit or ordain evil at all? And here the crucifixion of Christ becomes a crucial parallel. So Acts chapter 2, verse 23 says that Jesus was delivered up according to the definite plan of foreknowledge of God. And yet he was crucified by wicked hands. This is the same paradox. And the cross is both the greatest sin in human history and the centerpiece of God's redemptive love. That does not make God evil, but it does show that God can work through human wickedness without himself becoming wicked. Joseph's story, it prefigures that same pattern, right? An innocent man is betrayed, he suffers unjustly, and through his suffering, many lives are preserved. But we have to be very, very careful here, right? Because believing that God brings good from evil does not mean that evil becomes good. It does not mean that the perpetrators were justified in their evil actions. It does not mean victims should passively accept abuse because maybe God has a plan. It's not what we're saying here at all. Joseph does not say what the brothers did was secretly fine and okay. He says it very plainly. You meant evil. It's explicit, it's important, it matters. It's there, right? The evil stays evil. The perpetrators remain responsible. And God's redemption does not erase moral culpability. So Genesis 50:20 does not offer permission for evil. What it does do is offers hopes in the aftermath of evil. It tells us that God is so committed to redemption, so resourceful in his love, that even the worst human wickedness cannot finally thwart his life-giving purposes. That does not make evil good. It means God is greater than any evil we can perpetuate. Now, there is another question that we have to ask. When did God mean it for good? From before the foundation of the world? From the moment the brothers first plotted? Sometime during the prison years, or only later in retrospect? Classic Christian theism typically says God exists outside of time. And from that perspective, God meant Joseph's suffering for good from eternity. Nothing surprised him here. Nothing caught him off guard. And from the eternal divine perspective, the redemptive purpose was always there. Now, the strength of this view is confidence in God's sovereign plan. Its weakness, though, is that God can begin to feel distant, almost too far removed from the immediacy of actual lived pain. And the other end, some theological perspectives emphasize God's responsiveness in time. So in that kind of model, God did not eternally decree every detail beforehand, but when the brothers acted, he immediately began working to redeem the unfolding situation. Now, the strength there is we have a God who feels genuinely present and responsive in suffering. But the weakness is that some worry it limits divine sovereignty too much. Now, the Latter-day Saint view offers an interesting way of holding this together. God sees all things eternally. All things are, in fact, before him. And yet we live inside time. We experience things sequentially, and we suffer in sequence. We wait in sequence. We hope in sequence. So, from God's perspective, Joseph's story may have always been oriented towards redemption. But from Joseph's perspective, it unfolds step by step by step by step. Betrayal, slavery, false accusation, prison, waiting, vindication. And that matters, pastorally, right? Because Joseph did not live inside Genesis 50:20 while he was in that pit. He lived in confusion for 13 years, right? He lived in waiting, and that 13-year gap between age 17 and 30, for Joseph, that felt like a very, very long time. So whatever theological model you adopt, you cannot flatten the lived reality of suffering. Joseph did not experience a neat theological outline. He experienced abandonment, humiliation, injustice, and delay. And only later could he look back and recognize the pattern. And that's important for us too, right? Because when we suffer, we do not suffer from God's eternal vantage point. We suffer in real time. And the promise that God can mean it for good does not erase our present pain. It means that the waiting is not wasted. It means that God may be working even when we cannot yet see it. So how do we actually live in light of Genesis 50:20? What does this look like in real life? Well, first, we need to name evil as evil. Joseph does not euphemize what happened to him. He does not call it a misunderstanding, and he doesn't spiritualize it away. He says it plainly, you meant evil against me. That's pretty crucial because, especially for those who have suffered abuse and betrayal or injustice, you do not have to deny what happened was evil in order to trust that God can redeem it. God's redemptive work does not require moral confusion. Second, we refuse bitterness without denying pain. And this is where Joseph is really remarkable. He does not become hardened or destroyed by what others did to him. But that does not mean he was never wounded. It means that the wound did not get the final word. His son's names are pretty telling in that, right? Manasseh, as God has made me forget my hardship, and Ephraim, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. I mean, how powerful is that, right? Fruitfulness in affliction. Not only after it, but in it. And that is the path between denial and bitterness. Third, we learn to wait for the redemptive pattern to emerge, right? Joseph's vindication did not come quickly. He maintained integrity without any guarantee of a visible reward. In fact, quite the contrary. And most of us want answers now. We want relief now. We want blessings now. And we ask questions like, why did this happen? What good could possibly come from it? Bone cancer in children? How long will this last? And often heaven feels silent. I know I've been there. And Joseph, well, his story it teaches us that the redemptive meaning often emerges slowly on different timetables than we might want to demand. Now, you may not be able to see the pattern yet, but that does not mean there is no pattern. Fourth, we become instruments of redemption. Joseph does not merely survive. He becomes a mean of life for others. He's positioned to preserve people. And this is often part of how God redeems suffering. Not always, but often, right? The betrayed become reconcilers and the wounded become healers. The afflicted becomes advocates, not because suffering is good, but because God is able to bring redemptive vocation out of suffering. And I think we see this all around us. There's so many inspiring, amazing, strong people who have gone through dark times and dark suffering in their life, and they've come out the other end stronger in ways that aren't just about making them stronger, right? It makes so many other people around them stronger and able to come through things, and in many ways to come through it in a way that draws them to God, to Christ. And that's a beautiful thing. Maybe not in the moment of the suffering, but the outcome is exquisitely beautiful. And finally, we trust that our individual pain may belong to a story that's larger than ourselves. Joseph's suffering was not only about Joseph. It was bound up with the preservation of covenant family and the survival of so many lives and the larger purposes of God. Now, we may never fully understand how our trials connect to the larger tapestry, but Genesis 50:20 does invite us to trust that we are not wasted and not meaningless. We're not outside the reach of divine redemption. It says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. It's just one verse. It does not solve every theological problem. It does not eliminate mystery, and it doesn't make suffering easy, but it does offer hope. Hope that when others mean evil, God is not absent, and that hope that suffering does not get the final word. Hope that betrayal can become the seedbed of preservation in life, and that God is so committed to redemption that even the worst human wickedness cannot permanently derail his purposes. Now, the 5 theological frameworks that we explored, Calvinist, Arminian, Molinist, Open Theist, and LDS, they all attempt to explain the mechanics, and each contribute something, but perhaps the deeper truth is that the mechanics remain partly mysterious. We do not fully comprehend how these truths fit together, but we do know this. Joseph suffered unjustly, his brothers were morally responsible, and God brought redemption. All 3 are true at the same time. And for those who have experienced betrayal, abuse, injustice, or loss, that's going to matter to you, right? That's important because Joseph is not offering a slogan, right? He's bearing witness to what he lived through, that evil is real and God was redemptive. Both are true. That is the hope that we carry in our own suffering. We may not know how long our season of being in a pit will last. And we may not know when the prison doors will finally be opened, when the cupbearer finally remembers us. We may not know what good God may yet weave from our pain, but we do know this. God was with Joseph in the pit, in the prison, and in Pharaoh's court. And God is with us. He's with you and with me. The Lord meant it and means it for good. That's all I got for today. If this deep dive has been helpful, please go ahead, subscribe, hit the notification bell, right? We're doing biblical theology here that takes both faith and reason seriously. And also check out the written article on my Substack. It's full of all the citations, discussion questions, exploring each theological framework, and a bibliography if you want to go deeper into this. There's so much more that you can actually study on this topic. And of course, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, right? What are you thinking about? Did I miss something? Just share your stories and your thoughts, because not only do I learn from it, which is great, but what you think may be obvious might be something that's profoundly impactful to somebody else who's just reading through the comments. So please share. Let's really keep this going as a community. And let me know which theological framework resonates most with you. Have you experienced your own pit seasons where you later saw God's redemptive work? And how do you hold tension between divine sovereignty and human freedom, human free will, right? I read your comments and your engagements. They help and shape my future content, so let me know. All right, so this is posting during the week where we're studying Genesis 37 through 41. So while you're reading that, sit with Genesis 50, verse 20. Don't work past it. Let it challenge you and comfort you. Let it raise questions and let it deepen your trust that God, the God who is with Joseph, is with you. And the next time that someone just tells you a platitude, everything happens for a reason, you can give them an answer. Say, yes, you're right. God can bring good from evil. But that does not mean that the evil was good, and it does not mean God caused it, and it does not mean that victims should passively accept it. It means God is simply greater than evil, and that's the hope that we stand on. Anyway, that's a wrap for today. I appreciate you. I love you all. And I want you to know that, God and his spirit is with you no matter where you're at in your life. And if you're experiencing evil against you, just know that it's always going towards his plan of a greater good. And you can find comfort in that. And until then, until next time, thank you for being here. And thank you for spending some of your precious time to come listen with me.
Chose